things that Sue has done is very impressive. As you can see, she's been affiliated with the University of Sydney as a researcher, a clinician, a director of the Nutrition and Wellbeing Clinic in Castle Hill, and she's an advanced accredited practicing dietitian and been in private practice for over 30 years. And she's the author of many famous books, as you know, Food as Medicine. I love that book at home. So, Sue, one of the questions I'd like to ask you is 4 questions. What is your mission?
My mission can probably be distilled in a single sentence, and that is to translate nutritional science, but evidence-based nutritional science research findings into what to eat for dinner, so that everyone can live basically a healthier and happier life.
Well, I like my food, yeah. So do you only work with Adventists?
No. I have worked with Adventist over many years. I've actually never been employed by the church, technically, but I have assisted at the Media Centre for many years in various programming, and former editor of Science tells me I've actually been the longest-serving writer for Science magazine. But the Lord has led me and opened many doors, and I've had the privilege and pleasure of working with people from many different persuasions. For example, Jewish people. So I spoke at Bondi Event Cinemas to a very large group of Jewish people. I was invited to speak in a mosque and actually to record a full day's worth of recording. They have a studio because Muslim people are becoming increasingly interested in health and they want to broadcast globally. And in many other areas, I have had the privilege to work with people, be they atheists or agnostics. So I go wherever the Lord opens the doors.
So how have you supported the health message of the Adventist Church in the past?
Well, really as an independent, which I think in many ways is the best way, because you can really try and be unbiased. You're not towing anyone's party line. You're looking at the evidence at all times. And as I say, with the media side of things and even as a consultant to the Sanitarium Health Food Company for many years.
Last question, what do you think about community health programs like CHIP that we're running in the next few weeks?
I think they're brilliant. The research shows that when you participate in a community health program, you get a lot of blessings, health blessings, because it is a group. There are certain dynamics that occur that you don't get if you just see somebody one-to-one. There are many health benefits. We heard this morning in Sabbath school the benefits for our mind and mental health from attending the recovery program. But the CHIP program goes a bit broader, a bit wider, and programs like that, where they teach you how to eat for your best health, have been shown to provide benefits such as lowering your blood pressure, your cholesterol, and overall just making you feel a lot better.
What do you do in your spare time?
What spare time?
Yeah.
I love to take scenic walks, preferably overseas, but that'll have to wait. And I love to cook for friends.
May I pray with you?
Certainly, thank you.
Dear Lord, we thank you for Sue's ministry, and I pray today that you'll speak through her, that we may have the abundant life, Lord, that you promised. I pray in Jesus' name. Amen.
A few years ago, a lady who was interviewed as part of market research commissioned by the Sanitarium Health Food Company, and when asked how she felt in terms of her health, stated, "I'm not sick, but I'm not well either." We've noticed over the last 100 years that our life expectancy has increased considerably. If you look at this graph here, you will notice that back in the 1800s, people only survived till about the age of 40 or 50. Today, we're living in our 80s. And of course, this has come about as a result of advances in technology, great surgery, new drugs or medications, and, dare I say it, vaccinations. The problem is, although we're living longer, the data now shows that we're getting sicker. So we have a longer life, but more of that life is spent going in and out of hospitals and on multiple medications. If we look at the top 10 causes of death in the world, and I've specifically here just selected the high-income countries because Australia is part of these, you'll notice something really, really interesting. And this compares the year 2000 up until 2019. What you'll notice is the blue dots, 9 out of 10 of the top 10 causes are actually what we call non-communicable diseases. So these are chronic diseases. These are lifestyle-induced diseases. Only one of them is relevant to infectious agents. Of course, that might change in a few years' time. And if we narrow it down to look at the top 5 causes of diseases, specifically in Australia, you'll see the common culprits: coronary heart disease, of course, dementia's really increased. And dementia, in fact, in Australia is now the leading cause of death in women. Many people don't know that. They often think of breast cancer or something like that. And then you've got things like stroke, lung cancer, and chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. So again, these are chronic diseases. So what really is health when we consider health, and especially when we think about the statement made by the lady in that research study? The World Health Organization some time ago defined it as a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being, and not merely the absence of disease. So you have to wonder whether this lady was really living her best health. So researchers in recent time have started to move away from just studying what factors in our lifestyle can influence our longevity, how long we live, and are really moving towards studying this concept now known as health span. So how can we make more of the years that we live better years, quality years? How can we compress the morbidity, all those diseases, to the very latter stages of life? Because, of course, we all have to die of something eventually, but we don't have to suffer so long. So today, I'd like to discuss 3 questions with you. Firstly, we're going to be looking at why was a health message actually given to the Adventist Church back in the 1800s? Briefly, what is this health message? And finally, is it still relevant in the times that we're living today? So for the next couple of slides, I would like you to participate. So all I need you to do is to raise your hand if you agree with the statement as to why a health message was actually given to our church. Now, if you continue to agree, just keep your hand raised. So the first one, the health message was given that we might live longer. Who agrees with that? What about that we might enjoy the years we have? That we might help non-believers find the benefits and blessings of good health? That we might attain greater spiritual growth and development? That our mental perception might be sharpened to better understand secular and spiritual truth? And finally, that we might be enabled to render service to God more efficiently. Today, I would like to focus in particularly on the last one, because I agree with most of you who tended to have your hand up the whole time. God gave us advice to live a best life. He wanted us to live an abundant life for all those reasons, but in particular, I believe, the last one, because we can then help to fulfill the gospel commission. In John, we read that The Lord said, I am come that they may have life and have it to the full. And so God gives us abundantly, so we will abound in every good work. And that includes the mission that He's given each and every one of us in our lives. In a recent editorial in The Record, Pastor Glenn Townland reminded us of what our church's mission is collectively, and that is to take the three angels' message to the world. How does health relate to that? Ellen White stated back in 1899 that as the right arm is connected with the body, so the health reform and medical missionary work is connected with the third angel's message, and it is to work efficiently as the right arm for the defence of the body of truth. And I find this one particularly interesting. When properly conducted, the health work is an entering wedge, making a way for other truths to reach the heart. When the third angel's message is received in its fullness, health reform will be given its place in the councils of the conference, in the work of the church, in the home, at the table, and in all the household arrangements. When you consider that, health reform may help to bring in the third angel's message, but also, if you look at that statement very closely, it suggests that if we're not seeing health reform around us, we have not yet fully embraced the third angel's message. Ellen White also stated that doors that have been closed to him who merely preaches the gospel will be open to the intelligent medical missionary. She reminded us even back then that God reaches hearts through the relief of physical suffering. And isn't that exactly what Jesus did? I can tell you just from a personal point of view, when I was invited to go to South Korea, I've been there several times to speak for different audiences, but the third time I went, I was invited by the Adventist Union. And that was a really interesting experience because they're doing marvellous things in that country to help people who are non-believers. One of the things they do is run an English language school where they teach people how to speak English through reading the Bible and other texts. So I was invited to speak there, and it was the only time I actually had, sitting in the front row, nuns and priests who were not from the Adventist church. So I can tell you that health is a very, very powerful entering wedge, and that it can get you in front of audiences and in touch with people who otherwise you may never have an opportunity to speak to about Jesus. But in recent times, I don't know about you, I have certainly observed varied health views amongst Seventh-day Adventists. And you know, when I've done various media interviews, the media collectively seems to think we're all vegetarians, we all exercise, we all get 7 to 8 hours of sleep, we're all perfect. But the research on Adventists suggests that not all of us subscribe to the views and to the recommendations made by the church. Things that I've observed, and you may have observed others as well. Sometimes vegan Adventists, so those who comply with a 100% plant-based dietary pattern, seem to be considered to have extreme views. We know from the data that less than half of Adventists are actually lacto-ovo vegetarians, and that figure seems to be declining. Then we have other Adventists who seem to be quite open in condoning a Western diet and lifestyle, and almost kind of proud about it, and kind of laugh off any suggestion of the great need for us to take the health message quite seriously. And more recently, in the last particularly 15 years, we have seen that some of us have become great ambassadors for various supplements, shakes, personal care products, and our goal is to sign up everyone we see to buy often what are considered very expensive products. Some years ago, we had quite an issue in New Zealand where families that could ill afford to buy fruits and vegetables for their children were being convinced to sign up for these various expensive pyramid type schemes. So we're a mixed bunch. We're not really that different to anyone else, and our views can be disparaging. But this one, possibly the worst thing that we can do is be indifferent. Like, who cares? It's my body. I'll do what I want. Ellen White wrote that the indifference with which health books and health have been treated by many is actually an offence to God. And to separate the health work from the great body of work is not in his order. So let's remind ourselves just briefly, what is this health message that Adventists were given in the 1800s? And we certainly don't have a lot of time to get into any of it in detail. We get our health message basically from the Bible and also from the spirit of prophecy, because Ellen White was given some unique visions in her time about health that actually completely contrasted and contradicted what was believed at the time. So we all know about the original diet, which of course was 100% plant-based. I think Adventists in general, and you'd probably agree, are very clear on what is considered a clean and unclean meat. So we can probably give ourselves a big tick there. Number 3 and 4, however, are rather interesting because the Bible strongly recommends against eating animal fat. And yet, some of us may actually always look forward to that fat on the roast lamb or the Wagyu beef and never give it a second thought. But it's in the Bible. The Bible strongly talks about eating animal fat. And I'm not going to go into why the science actually confirms that that's a very smart idea. And the 4th one, eating blood. Now, you might think we're not one of those tribes that drinks the blood of, freshly slaughtered animals, but have you ever considered if you eat a steak that you've bought from Woolworths or Coles, you're actually eating animal blood? I remember in my early teens when I lived in Victoria, at the time I was quite the carnivore, my mother used to go to the Jewish or the kosher butchers. Why would you go there? Because you could buy animals that were slaughtered in a way that was biblically described to release the blood. So these are some of the key elements that the Bible discusses. And of course there are more, especially in regard to infectious diseases. Ellen White wrote profusely about health, and there are many things we could say. Interestingly, more than half of the things she stated are now endorsed, proven, supported by evidence-based science. She talked a lot about various principles of healthy living. She talked about a balanced diet. At the time, she pointed to the original plant-based diet and the addition of vegetables and modest dairy and a few eggs. But she did say that towards the end of time that we should consider giving up these animal-based products as well, and that we would know it was the time because God would provide adequate, nutritionally adequate replacements. She discussed at length the importance of water, fresh air, sunlight, rest, exercise, abstinence from harmful things such as alcohol and tobacco. And of course, if you read that list today, you can almost be ho-hum because everyone seems to know that now. But this was in stark contrast with what was considered to be a good idea in her time. And she talked a lot about preventative medicine and also mental health as well as spiritual health. And just to give you a little inkling of what medicine was like in her time, I'm going to share a couple of quick facts. Did you know that at the time, in the 1800s, popular medical procedures regularly included things like purging, bleeding — we have an American president that died after being literally bled to death — and drugging. I mean, heroin was used as an anaesthetic when you had to have surgery. Today, it's considered an illicit drug. To become a medical doctor, you only needed 6 months of training. Sunshine was shunned. And of course, night air was considered dangerous. Have you heard the saying, "Oh, be careful, you'll catch your death of cold"? And poor nutrition knowledge was prevalent. At one point in time, the sale of fresh vegetables was considered illegal in New York. They had an unhealthy dress code. Women were literally roped up. And life expectancy in the US in 1850 was 39.4 years. So that greeting we often greet each other with, "How are you?" that actually comes from that period of time, because it was a genuine inquiry into your health. And there was a very high infant mortality rate. So these ideas, these concepts, these guidelines that God had given Ellen White in vision were in great contradistinction with what was taught at the time and believed. And the Bible in Micah 6:8 clearly says that God has shown us what is good. If only we would have a bit more faith and stop questioning everything and just do what He says, this would be a good idea, because we know that we glorify Him through our lives. So, in a bit of a summary, the core health teachings of the Adventist Church today could be as such, and just remember these principles here, because I'll come back to those shortly. So is it still relevant today? What do you think? I would say more than ever. Why? Because chronic diseases are absolutely rife. So while we're better at extending life, propping us up, helping us live longer, we're no better at preventing the onset of diseases. So in this particular study from Sweden, which is a westernised country similar to Australia, we know now that people who are 60 years and older, of those, 89% have at least 2 chronic diseases. And here what's included are things also like risk factors such as high blood pressure and cholesterol. 73% have at least 3. 56% have at least 4. And how many were free from any of the 60 disease categories? 3%. Hardly anyone. So the concept of multi-morbidity has become quite a big concept in science, where literally we're having to study these combinations of conditions because they're so rife. This data's from Australia, and you might be surprised to know that amongst adults, 87% of people are taking at least 1 pill every single day. Of course, once you start taking one, it's for the rest of your life. And 43% take 5 or more. It's alarming. And for some years now, what's been impressed upon me is that the devil is very likely using ill health, chronic disease, as one of the easiest mechanisms, one of the easiest ways to devour us, to shorten our life, to make us less fit for the service, for the mission that God has given us on this earth. You don't have to just die from a drug overdose. He's doing it in a much more clever way, in ways that possibly we haven't considered in enough depth in the past. And yet, even back in the time of the Israelites in Exodus, it's stated in the Bible, it's stated, if you listen carefully to the Lord your God and do what is right in his eyes, if you pay attention to his commands and keep all his decrees, I will not bring on you any of the diseases I brought on the Egyptians, for I am the Lord who heals you. And today, modern science is finding that our lifestyle, which we call lifestyle medicine now, and our food in particular, has healing properties. You can either be slowly promoting disease or you can be healing disease with every single meal. So, what percentage of the most common diseases do you think are preventable according to science? Well, I've given you a clue. For type 2 diabetes, it's as high as 90%. What about cardiovascular disease, so heart attack and stroke? Does anyone want to have a guess? What percentage do you think is preventable? 100%? Any other takers? What about cancer? Depends which cancer, of course, yes. How about dementia? This is the area of my particular research interest. Incurable, someone says? Once you get it, it is. So the opportunity with dementia is, or actually with cognitive decline, is to get in earlier and slow the problems in thinking and memory. We now know that up to 80% of cardiovascular diseases are totally preventable. That's big. Cancer up to 60% on average, but for some cancers like colorectal cancer, which are more strongly associated with our lifestyle, how much we move and what we eat, it's actually like 90%. And even for dementia, which you might say the brain is the last frontier in research, it's been the most complicated, the most difficult to study, we currently have data that suggests a third of the cases of dementia are preventable. And all the top researchers around the world believe that this is probably an underestimate. Because what we're finding is that risk factors for these other diseases are also risk factors for the brain. It's just that it takes longer for problems to present. But as we're living longer, we're starting to show up the problems in our brains. So, in recent times, something that's really been growing in the secular and scientific world is this concept of lifestyle medicine. What's lifestyle medicine? It's really taking simple, low-tech modalities such as walking or moving, how much you move, looking at your sleep habits, addressing stress, all these things that don't require a prescription pad and what you eat, and using that as your medicine to both prevent, better manage and reverse disease. These are just examples of some of the lifestyle medicine societies now from different countries. I'm pleased to say that some Adventist health professionals are very active in these societies, but what is a bit of a shame is that these societies are being driven by secular scientists. And if you remember that list that I showed you earlier, the specific 8, you might say, remedies, guidelines that Ellen White was provided to share with all of us so we can live our best lives, how interesting is it that this particular diagram from the American College of Lifestyle Medicine encapsulates the 6 key: healthful eating, physical activity, managing stress, the importance of relationships, that social connectivity, our sleep, and avoiding risky substances. So in many ways, the world has caught up to what once we were a lone voice in promoting and preaching. Ellen White also stated this: there are conditions to be observed by all who would preserve health. All should learn what these conditions are. The Lord is not pleased with ignorance. We can't just put our head in the sand anymore in regard to his laws, either natural or spiritual. We are to be workers together with God for the restoration of health to the body as well as to the soul. And we should teach others how to preserve and to recover health. It's a bit of a mission statement, isn't it? So just narrowing in a little bit on diet and the popular diets that we're hearing people talk about in these times. The two biggest trends that I've observed in very recent times are trends that really promote a high protein, usually high animal protein diet, and the other side of the coin is a plant-based dietary pattern. Have you noticed those? How many of you have heard of keto diets? Everyone now, and paleo. You know, in many ways, these are just a morphing of the old Atkins diet. Why do people go on those diets? Well, often they're seeking a very fast solution to get some result or an outcome, such as weight loss. But did you know, for the keto type diets, we now have really good data that at 1 year and at 2 years, you're no better off than on any diet you might have gone on. For one reason, people cannot stick to these diets because it's not a natural way of eating. There is no traditional society. Well, there are very few traditional societies that just live on big hunks of meat. We also have great concerns in the longer term if people comply with these diets. In the shorter term, it's probably not going to kill you. But what that's doing to your microbiome is of great concern to health professionals. I'm going to talk about that in a minute. Plant-based dietary patterns, on the other hand, are getting more and more emphasis in dietary guidelines around the world as the research keeps coming in and consistently showing things like that. It's not just the type of fat you eat that's important, it's not just the type of carbohydrate that you eat that's important, but even the quality of your protein. Did you know that if you eat more animal protein, your risk of type 2 diabetes shoots up tremendously? Whereas if your diet contains far more plant protein, that reduces risk of type 2 diabetes, even gestational diabetes. Who knew? Most recently, there has been a great interest on eating better, not just for our own health, but for planetary health. You've probably heard a lot of conversations in recent times to do with our Prime Minister and what Australia's going to do to help with climate change. How many of you have heard of the journal called The Lancet? I bet the intellectuals at the front would have, and anyone at university. So The Lancet is one of the most prestigious medical journals in the world. And every so often it commissions a special report on a topic that's considered to be very important globally. So very recently it commissioned a report and it recruited some of the top names. This report in particular, the first author is Professor Walter Willett, who used to be head of the Harvard Nutrition Department for many years, and to come out and to advise the world on how we should eat. Because we don't have infinite resources. How can we eat to eat better for our health because of the issues we're having with chronic diseases, but also for planetary health? And this is what they came up with. I'm just showing you the visual. If you consider your total intake as a plate, 100%, you will notice that most, except for this little section here, is plant-based. Does that surprise you? And if we take that protein little wedge out and blow it up a bit, what you'll see again is that the majority of protein that is now recommended for human and planetary plant is to come from plants, plant protein, legumes and nuts, because these foods strongly prevent, help you better manage and can even reverse certain chronic diseases. And very, very small percentage is to be consumed, if at all, from animal foods. This is not coming from an Adventist institution. It's not something Ellen White wrote. It's now being promoted by secular scientists worldwide. And just even last week, as governments are renewing their official dietary guidelines, the Danish dietary guidelines were released. And look at this, how interesting. Again, this huge emphasis on plant-based eating. You don't even see red meat appear because, of course, it's one of the biggest culprits, red meat and dairy, to greenhouse gas emissions and pesticide use. And in fact, you know, if you change your eating pattern from a carnivorous or omnivorous diet to a 100% plant-based diet, you do far more for the planet than changing your car, selling your diesel or whatever guzzling car and switching to an electric car. So the biggest problem, as we see in nutrition science for people's health, is not are you getting enough protein? Everyone seems to be obsessed about eating so much protein. The reality is, in Australia and other Western countries, people eat 2 to 3 times more protein than is recommended. That is not the problem. The biggest problem is we're not eating enough dietary fibre. Where do you get dietary fibre from? Plant foods. But which type of plant foods? Many types, but the ones that are not refined. Because you could actually be eating a vegan diet and having a very low fibre diet, couldn't you, if you only chose refined plant foods? It's not just the absence or the relative absence of animal products, it's also what else you do eat. We need to be far more interested in fibre, and today I'm going to give you just a little glimpse of why. So here comes the sciencey bit, so hold on. I'm going to try and make it really, really simple, but this research in the microbiome is really blowing the minds of researchers around the world because it's helping us understand finally some of the mechanisms and why certain dietary patterns are so strongly linked to certain conditions. So this is the human gastrointestinal tract. We have our mouth here, here's our food pipe, here's our stomach, and liver, and this is the small intestine, so the food has to travel all the way through. Here's our large intestine, and out goes the residue. Now, between here and here, there's a good 7 to 8 metres, so it's a long way. If you eat a dietary pattern that has a lot of fibre, the food will travel through much faster, and we think that's a very good thing. If you eat a pattern that is limited in plant foods and dietary fibre, it'll be very stagnant, and you won't be opening your bowels every day, let alone 2 or 3 times a day. But the interest lately has come in this section, in the colon. More than 20, 30 years ago, nobody realised that the colon was going to turn out to be one of the most important things that determines our health. Why? Because although we have microbes, such as bacteria, living in every part of our body, up our noses, in our ears, on our hands, the greatest majority reside right here, in the large bowel or the colon. And understanding with modern technology who lives there has enabled us to understand disease processes. When it comes to diet, which is now recognised by all the leading experts on the microbiome as being the number one modulator of who lives there, we know two things. One, the more diverse your dietary pattern, the better, because you have a diversity of the type of species that reside, and that's associated with good health. And two, the more plant-based rather than animal-based, again, the greater the diversity and the better the health outcomes. And I mean all kinds of health outcomes that before we had no inclination were related to diet and related to what lives inside your gut. The reason for that is simply because what we eat doesn't just feed us. We don't digest everything we eat. Some of it passes through to the large bowel. And so who has a go at it then? The bacteria. They ferment it. And what they make, the fermentation products, we call them metabolites, you can call them whatever you like, substances, these are the key molecules, because these substances then, literally after every meal, signal from your gut to your brain, from your gut to your heart, from your gut to your fat tissue. What do we mean by signalling? These are chemical signals, but they control the expression of your genes in all parts of your body, and in particular, they control your immune system. So you actually are much more powerful than you realise, because every meal has the potential to either be slowly healing you or harming you. And the problem is, with the harm, is we can't feel it. It's all silent. But I can tell you, within hours of eating, we can show, if you eat, say, a fast food meal, children eating a fast food meal who have asthma, within hours of eating, we show inflammation increase in the lungs. We measure all kinds of inflammatory markers, to the point that if they need to use their Ventolin, it doesn't work properly. So the microbiome, which includes the bacteria and the other microbes, which we call microbiota, and all the products they make, these metabolites, has been linked to multiple conditions now. These are just some, you will see, to our immune system, to lung function, to liver, fatty liver, to many, many things, and more recently even to our brain and to mental health issues. I was very interested to hear the outcomes of the depression recovery program that Judy spoke about this morning in Sabbath school, because we now have a few clinical trials. This is the highest level of evidence showing if you intervene, if you put someone on a high plant-based dietary pattern with a lot of fibre, you can get improvements within anxiety and depression over and above what you can achieve with standard medication. And this is from the SMILES trial in Victoria, in Australia, one of the first in the world. And we've known for years, children that grow up eating a lot of refined foods, they might even be plant foods, but they're refined, they're low in fibre, have much higher rates of anxiety and depression. And we're seeing that in adults. Ellen White stated, so closely is health related to our happiness that we cannot have the latter without the former. And again, she says, a practical knowledge of the science of human life is necessary in order to glorify God in our bodies. Many are drifting about without knowledge. What is more, they are not interested to learn how to keep their bodies in a healthy condition and prevent disease. So it's a great thing that you've got the CHIP program coming up in your church. And I just want to add to the voice that David mentioned earlier, this is not just for your friends, your family, people in the community. This is for you. Some of us may need a refresher course. Some of us may need to be remotivated, re-inspired. Others may never have really understood what is our Adventist health message. But how much better, how much more efficacious can we all be if we live and breathe and look like we're following the health message? We can help people around us. We can help them with their physical health first, like Jesus did. And we know that's the entering wedge for all kinds of other ways that we can possibly help them in a spiritual manner. This slide is just to really emphasize the importance of those unrefined plant foods, the type that would have been consumed by Adam and Eve in the garden, because there wouldn't have been any chips, there wouldn't have been any Big Macs, even with a veggie burger. These were unrefined, simple foods. There was a lot of food to feed the good bacteria. If you feed yourself a lot of plant food, and I don't mean just at one meal of the day, like having a lot of vegetables at night, but if you actually give little installments at breakfast, lunch and dinner of plant food that is unrefined, you are actively feeding up the good bacteria. And then they're going to look after you. They're going to fight off the bad bacteria, and they're going to look after that balance. There's all kinds of molecules we can talk about, but when the bacteria ferment the fibre, they make things like butyrate, acetate, and so on. Of course, one of the side effects is they also make some gas, so do expect some more of that as you're starting to eat more legumes. But it's a sign of good things going on. And this is probably the most beautiful picture you're going to see today. What on earth is it? I'm very honoured to be able to share this with you. This is from colleagues at Stanford University in the US, and you rarely get to see something like this. This is actually a picture of the cross-section of the gut, the colon. And I'll explain to you which way to read it. So if you think of our intestines, our bowel, like a long hose, like a long garden hose, it's round. And they took literally a section of that. The middle part is where you see like the hundreds of thousands, Smarties, or whatever you want to call them. This actually is all kinds of microbes. These are bacteria. These are yeasts. These are other types of microbes. Our gut is full of them. What we want to make sure is that we've got more of the good, not so much of the bad. Here we have this layer, it's called the mucus layer. So inside your gut, lining the cells, you have this little layer called the mucus layer that again years ago was not appreciated in terms of how important it is for good health. And then the blue things, these are actually the little nuclei, the control centers of each cell. So this is actually where your body starts. For years, and this comes as a surprise to many people, we have always considered this part to be external to the body. So while you think, but it's part of me, it's inside me, it's not. From this end to the other end, things are passing through. That is considered external. Where it becomes internal is if something from here gets in through the mucus layer and then through the cells there and then gets into your bloodstream. Then if it's the wrong thing, there's a big problem. So what we're finding with Western lifestyles, and especially the Western diet, there is this, if you like, erosion of the mucus layer. We're finding that some of the bacteria that normally are not considered the bad guys, when you don't feed them fibre, they get hungry. What do you think they're doing? They're starting to munch through the mucus layer. So they're opening you up to all kinds of external things. And bacteria make a lot of bad things. Also, some things from food that normally would not be toxic to you because they shouldn't be getting in can get through. If you eat a high fibre diet on a regular basis, which would have been extraordinarily high in the Garden of Eden and is very high still in some primitive societies that we see, such as in Africa, you are on a daily basis, A, repairing the mucus layer and preventing this what's called intestinal permeability or leaky gut, so that the bad guys here can't get in and the products they make that are bad are less likely to get in. Now, is this really all that important? If I tell you that we now understand that there are 100 more times microbial genes in your body than your own, then it really starts to dawn that this is probably really important. It's only starting to, show up as the tip of the iceberg. So genes are just like a blueprint, a recipe for things to be made. So if there's 100 times more recipes for things to be made in your body coming from these foreign things, the microbes, than your own, then they've got to be really important in terms of how well you will live and how long you will live and how many diseases and when you'll get them. And your microbiota in here correlates strongly with your long-term dietary pattern. Of course, we see big shifts even within 1 weekend of eating junk food or rubbish. So things start to change quickly and you can see improvements, and that's evidenced in how people describe how much better they feel when they eat more plant-based and high fibre. But it's really your long-term microbiota, which really is a reflection of how you've been eating for the longer term. And if that still has not convinced you, you can leave today remembering one fact. You're each carrying at least 2 kilograms of these bugs in your gut. They're pretty important. So we need to make sure we're feeding the good ones and not the bad ones. If you feed the bad ones, and here's the interesting thing, especially when it comes to animal proteins such as red meat, they produce compounds that are very harmful, that cause inflammation in the body. You might have heard of ammonia, indoles, cresols, trimethylamine. All these things have been independently studied and collectively studied and shown to be strongly associated with conditions such as inflammatory bowel disease, early heart attack or stroke, among people who don't have classical risk factors, because we've all heard of those people. Oh, he was a jogger, he was lean, and then suddenly he dropped dead. But these people have high markers, high levels of these substances made by the bad bacteria. So it's much more about things we didn't know. These bad metabolites don't live in the food. They're made from the food by the bacteria that live in you. But the type of bacteria that live in you is greatly determined by what you eat. So we should be eating far more foods that look like this. These are examples from a traditional eating pattern, such as the Mediterranean diet, all kinds of beans and greens and whole grains and more vegetables, and far less, if any, of foods that look like this. Now, you might be quite startled if I tell you that actually I took these photos at potluck lunches in Adventist churches. Not at Wahroonga. None are from Wahroonga. But I wasn't there when they were served, is that right? So I know, as a fact, that many of us could do better. Do you agree? There's so much more we could do, not just to help ourselves, but to help others. Because one of the first things people judge us on and remark on when they come here for the first time is not what we preach, but what we do, and especially if they've come to lunch, what we eat. Because many of these people are interested in health. So they come to see what all these blue zone people are eating. The people in the top 5 regions of the world that are considered to live the longest. So as we start to wrap up, we're reminded in 1 Corinthians that our body is actually a shrine. It's a temple. It's a virtual temple. Think of it as that. And that we don't belong to ourselves. It's actually not your choice what you feed yourself. You're given a command. It's not an option. Because why? Because we were bought. And we were bought with a very, very expensive price. And that was the blood of Jesus Christ. And therefore, we need to honour our bodies and we need to honour God through our bodies. Ellen White reminds us that we're only each given one lease in life. Well, we know it. We all know it, especially when we lose loved ones. And in recent times, many of us have lost loved ones, including dear members from our own congregation here in this church. So the question on each of our lips should be, how can I invest my powers so that they may yield the greatest profit? How can I do most for the glory of God and the benefit of my fellow man? For life is valuable only as it is used for the attainment of these ends. Finally, in closing, the Adventist message, the health message, was given a long time ago now, more than 100 years. At the time, it was considered quite fringy and in great contrast to what was recommended. But now, it's actually underpinned by modern and evidence-based science as the best way to live. You could summarise it in 8 holistic principles, which you can learn about in more detail if you go to the CHIP program, but you can see them here. Getting fresh air, an adequate fresh air, exposing yourself to the sun at appropriate times, doing things in moderation, because, working too long is also something that's not that healthy. Getting adequate rest and exercise, having a proper diet, drinking water as our primary drink, and having that belief in a higher power. And we know now, you don't even have to go by faith. The science confirms it, that following such a healthy lifestyle can help you live your best life so you can better fulfill the Gospel Commission. I'm going to leave you with one last slide for all of those that used to love reading Berto in the record, looking at his cartoons. Thank you.